For more than a decade, Roger Moore wasn't just playing James Bond, he was James Bond. With his razor-sharp wit, effortless charm, and unshakable confidence, he became the face of 007 longer than any other actor in history. To audiences, it seemed like he was born for the role, a man who slipped into the tuxedo as naturally as the spy he portrayed. But behind the glamour, Moore carried doubts, struggles, and a secret reason that ultimately forced him to walk away from the role that defined his career. Before his death, he finally revealed why he left James Bond, and the truth is more surprising than anyone imagined. A man whom every woman seemed to admire and every man aspired to emulate. Yet, when he abruptly departed, the world was left in shock. His departure was not merely a career decision, it marked the conclusion of an era and the onset of a revelation that few anticipated. Beneath the glitz, the joy, and the charming facade lay a concealed, heart-wrenching reality. Moore had endured a life that few could fathom, becoming a casualty of the very adoration that the world believed he desired. If you remain with us until the conclusion, you'll discover the deeply personal and painful secret he bore silently over the years. This narrative goes beyond the reasons behind Roger Moore's exit from Bond. It is a contemplative exploration of how one man's iconic role transformed cinema while leaving emotional scars that extended far beyond the silver screen. Join us in this video as we delve into the reasons why Roger Moore stepped away from James Bond. Roger Moore was born on October 14, 1927, in Stockwell, London. As an only child in a humble household, he was brought up by a father who worked as a local constable and a mother, the daughter of a general, who managed their limited finances with care. Despite the financial constraints, Moore nurtured a vibrant dream. The enchantment of cinema captivated him. At the age of 16, he took his initial step towards that dream by becoming an apprentice cartoonist at an animation studio. Although it was not glamorous work, fetching meals and running errands, it was a beginning. Then came a blunder that appeared to close the door on his aspirations. An error involving valuable animation cells led to his dismissal. However, fate had other plans. A burglary at the residence of esteemed director Brian Desmond Hurst brought Moore's father into the investigation. Recognizing a chance for his son, he introduced Roger to Hurst. That meeting altered everything. Hurst recognized his potential and offered him a minor role as an extra in Caesar and Cleopatra. Roger eagerly accepted, marking his first encounter with the film industry. He made an immediate impression on the set, standing 6 feet 4 inches with golden hair and sharp blue eyes. Everyone's eyes were drawn to him. Between takes, he was trailed by female admirers, a level of attention that most newbies could only hope for. Hurst took notice of his charm and continued. Moore was able to enroll at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art with his assistants. Roger discovered more than training there. He acquired the sophisticated accent and polished appeal that would eventually come to characterize James Bond. Additionally, he became lifelong friends with Lois Maxwell, who would go on to become Miss Moneypenny. It was the start of a journey molded by fortuitous meetings, silent battles, and the kind of fate that only hindsight can explain. Like any spy mission he would later portray on television, Roger Moore's journey to love was tumultuous. He met Dawn Van Steen, a beautiful 26-year-old Roto student, actor, and single mother, thanks to Brian Desmond Hurst. At the age of 19, Roger was a young, handsome man when he married her. It looked like a romance out of a fairy tale at first. The light, however, was short-lived. There was a darker tale going on behind the surface. Few people could have predicted the man who would one day be the picture of charm. Dawn's annoyance turned into cruelty as Moore's acting career stagnated. The verbal jabs were painful. "As an actor, you will never succeed," she once told him, "your face is too weak." Her rage occasionally became physical. Moore would later remember the scratches that left marks on more than just his skin, and the teapot that flew at him following a playful comment. He finally hit his breaking point. He left behind a marriage based more on suffering than love when he left. But he was still being tested by fate. He met 12-year-old soprano Dorothy Squires in 1952. Magnetic and fiery. He couldn't resist the draw, even if he was still married to Dawn. Dorothy became his wife in 1953 following his divorce. Their connection was electric at first, but she had a temper just as bad as Dawn's. While animosity grew and Squires declined, Moore's career took off in America. Violent arguments broke out. She smashed a guitar over his head during one altercation. There was another great sadness in their private life. The couple experienced multiple miscarriages despite their desire to have children. Each loss was a scar that never fully healed for more people who aspired to be fathers. He wore a leading man's polished smile in public. In private, the echo of what could have been and the burden of a failed love weighed heavily on his heart. Roger Moore and Dorothy Squires' marriage was in its latter stages of disintegration by 1961. Squires issued a command. It was over or you had to leave America. She was upset over his alleged interest in actress Dorothy Proyne and had had enough arguments. Traveling to Birmingham from the United States didn't help to defuse the situation. Italian actress Luisa Mattioli was the source of temptation on the set of Romulus and the Sabines. Perhaps it was unavoidable, as Moore had a habit of falling in love again before his old relationships were severed. He started an affair with Mattioli. Dorothy was furious when Moore eventually left Squires for her. When the cops arrived, she famously said, "It's my heart that's bleeding," after throwing a brick through his window. Squires launched a relentless campaign to further hurt Moore the next year, accusing him of ignoring their marriage and even bringing actor Kenneth More to court for calling Mattioli Moore's wife before the divorce was formally finalized. Her unwillingness to give him a divorce, however, left him in limbo for almost 8 years, which was the biggest wound. A professional miracle occurred during this emotional standstill. Moore was cast in The Saint as the stylish secret agent Simon Templar. Roger became a household name worldwide as a result of the series, which was televised in over 60 countries. He had long lacked security in his personal life, but fame provided it. In 1969, Squires finally gave in. Moore had the right to wed Luisa Mattioli. It was also a spectacular wedding. Flashing cameras, screaming crowds, and a groom who seemed like he was ready to take on the world. Moore was on the cusp of his best chapter yet, his career booming and his family by his side. One in which he would exchange James Bond's tuxedo for Simon Templar's halo. Roger Moore, wearing a dinner jacket, was brushed aside by fate in 1966. After Sean Connery resigned, the James Bond producers found themselves without their star, so they offered him what most actors would refer to as the part of a lifetime. However, Moore, always the gentleman, declined to intervene as long as Connery's shadow persisted. He made it clear to them that he would only think about Bond after Connery had actually put up the tux. It was an uncommon form of loyalty in a field where honor is sometimes subordinated to opportunity. Years later, when the call came again, this time for Live and Let Die, that patience paid off. It was an electric reaction. The media was unrelenting, fans were enthusiastic, and Roger Moore emerged as the new face of the most well-known spy in movies. But behind the thrill, he was burdened with expectation. Bond has already become ingrained in popular culture after 7 films. It was his moment to continue the legend. For battle scenes and stunts, the studio wanted him to be sharper and leaner. He altered his hairdo, lost weight, and exercised to get in top shape. Moore understood, but he wasn't delighted. Bond was more than just a character, he was a symbol. Moore was prepared to give it his all once the metamorphosis was finished. It was welcomed by audiences. Few people could have imagined Bond's existence in the early movies. Beautiful women, exotic locales, sophisticated suits, and villains bold enough to take on impossible tasks. For male viewers of the time, in particular, Bond was the epitome of self-assurance and authority. Bond remained the ultimate hero because women like Domino in Thunderball still frequently needed to be rescued. Furthermore, a Bond movie was only as excellent as its antagonists. From the tall, steel-toed Jaws to the cunning Blofeld, Moore's reign produced memorable enemies. His Live and Let Die debut is still considered one of the best handovers in the series. It had everything. Many people praised Paul McCartney's blazing title track as the greatest Bond theme ever, and there were exciting chases and colorful settings. Above all, it presented Moore's Bond. Astute, calm, and equipped with a well-timed comment. He didn't use physical force to defeat adversaries. He was smarter than them. His Bond movies became increasingly camp and humorous over time. However, the ratio of cleverness to danger was ideal for that initial excursion. He demonstrated that Bond could be more than just a blunt tool and that the franchise could change without losing its core. It was possible that he was a gentleman who knew when to shoot and when to grin. The inheritance was not simple. It might have been disastrous to take on a character that had been immortalized by another actor. However, Moore gave the series a new lease on life with his natural ease, reluctance to copy, and ability to play Bond as someone you'd like to have a drink with. Despite the splendor, the profession had demanding requirements. In two terms, Moore would describe them as straightforward: running and weapons. However, those fights, the pains, the bruises, and the invisible labor were a different story, revealing the amount of effort required to make Bond appear effortlessly cool. Action was a given in James Bond's high-octane world. It frequently held a distinct beat with Roger Moore, though. He rarely executed his own stunts, and his fight scenes were measured and his blows thoughtful. One odd trademark. He left all such images to a body double because he didn't want to sprint on camera because he thought he looked weird. His dislike of weapons, particularly firearms, was equally remarkable. This antipathy was stoked during his military duty after a firearm malfunctioned and began in boyhood after he was hurt in a BB gun mishap. Fans of the most well-known fictional spy in the world may find it ironic that he previously acknowledged, "I've always hated guns and what they stand for." Moore's personal beliefs, however, revealed a more nuanced picture. Reminiscent of his challenging childhood, he supported causes for underprivileged children, motivated by his close friend Audrey Hepburn's relentless work with UNICEF. After a while, he disclosed an unpleasant reality. He had been abused as a child. He was ashamed for years and didn't disclose it until he was 16. He thought that by speaking forward, others might be freed from the same guilt and quiet. Beneath 007's slick facade was a man who had been through his own struggles and used his notoriety to defend the rights of those too young to defend themselves. The studio made what would turn out to be an expensive error following the success of Roger Moore's Bond debut. They attempted to make the tone of the character darker. Audiences weren't impressed, and Moore didn't appreciate the change, detesting the notion of portraying Bond as a chilly, brutish character. The franchise almost failed because of the guy with the golden gun's poor performance. When Moore back in 1976, the producers knew a reinvention was essential. A new director, a sparkling screenwriter, and a decision to embrace Moore's herbal wit and appeal introduced Bond returned to existence. Director Lew Grade even argued that Moore's playful interpretation became more true to Ian Fleming's unique imaginative and prescient. The gamble paid off. When The Secret Agent Who Loved Me premiered on the 1977 Cannes movie competition, the reception became euphoric. Critics cherished it, enthusiasts loved it, and Moore himself known as it his exceptional and maximum exciting Bond day out. It became a top second in his career. But as with every peaks, the descent changed into inevitable. Via his fifth movie, Moore became growing restless. He quietly instructed manufacturers he failed to want to return for a sixth. However, whilst Warner Brothers introduced their own rival Bond movie starring Sean Connery, the stress became on. The producers begged Moore again and he agreed. His film Octopussy ended up outperforming Connery's By No Means Say By No Means Again. Still, the cracks were displaying. On A View to a Kill, Moore clashed with co-big name Grace Jones, who blasted loud song in the course of breaks, shattering his tries at rest. In his autobiography, he disregarded the topic with the form of restraint his mom had taught him. When you have nothing properly to say about a person, say not anything in any respect. However, the deeper trouble was one he could not forget about, his age. At 57, Moore determined himself paired with Maine women younger sufficient to be his daughter or maybe his granddaughter. It turns into rather disgusting, he admitted, describing himself as a dirty antique guy. Critics agreed, panning the film and reinforcing his perception that it changed into time to step away. Looking again, his selection feels much less like quitting and extra just like the quiet dignity of understanding whilst to leave the level. For Moore, it wasn't simply the stop of an era. It changed into the remaining of a bankruptcy he had helped outline. After putting up the Tuxedo for Excellent, Roger Moore turned into Geared Up to turn the web page. For the primary time in decades, there were no scripts, no call sheets, just lifestyles. For the next 5 years, he stepped quietly far from the glare of the cameras, devoting himself to humanitarian work with UNICEF, a cause he had long loved. Popularity quickly followed, and in time he became Ned for his contributions both on and rancid the display screen. However simply as he seemed to be embracing this new bankruptcy, lifestyles threw him an unkind twist. At 66, Moore obtained a diagnosis that could shake him to his center. Prostate cancer. It became a confrontation with his mortality, a warfare fought not on a film set, but in stark sanatorium rooms. Although he sooner or later made a full restoration, the ordeal left him changed. He emerged no longer as James Bond, the unflappable hero, however as a man extra aware of life's fragility, re-evaluating the picks and priorities that had as soon as regarded fixed. Nevertheless, Moore's cinematic legacy turned into plain. Bond, under his charm and wit, had become something unique from the caped crusaders of comic books. He turned into no alien, no guy with supernatural powers, only a person who could outwit threat with fashion. Audiences loved him due to the fact, for once, the hero on display felt like a person they could meet in real lifestyles. And at the same time as Moore in the end surpassed the mantle, his 7-movie run stays the longest in the franchise's records, cementing him as a defining face of the function. His effect rippled a long way beyond the films themselves. Bond redefined the spy genre, stimulated infinite imitators, and gave rise to the unforgettable Bond woman archetype. Girls who have been extra than embellishes, holding their own as successful, daring companions. The brand of Bond with its fast vehicles, unusual looks, and impeccable fashion became a cultural magnet, shaping the whole lot from motion cinema to advertising. In might also 2017, the world stated goodbye. Roger Moore died in Switzerland at 89 after a quiet war with cancer. For thousands and thousands, it felt like losing a vintage friend. He had been many stuff, a film celebrity, a philanthropist, a knight. However, to generations of film fanatics, he could always be the man who reminded us that every so often the finest heroes put on not anything extra than a grin and a fit.